we have been doing some deep thinking about lessons past where we look back and we go, why did I teach in that way? And how was I seduced by these ideas?
So what particular memory has resurfaced for you then?
So, first of all, it was the same year 8 class.
Oh, those poor year 8 children.
As that photosynthesis lesson I described last time. Second of all, if I've just remembered this, there was a set of twins in year 8 and I taught one of them this year 8 class. And at the beginning of the lesson I'm about to describe, they had swapped places. So I had a pupil that I didn't actually teach who I taught before in my lesson. But that's a whole separate story.
This happens I've heard this quite a lot actually from teachers where twins just swap places intentionally just for the jokes.
Of course you would. If you're a twin, that is...
And you're identical, right?
And you're obviously, yeah. Imagine trying it.
Just preface it with that rather obvious facts.
It would be so funny if non-identical twins tried that. Anyway, so...
Stating the obvious.
So, of course they would do that. But anyway, that derailed the start of the lesson anyway. But then the rest of the lesson was about limited resources like fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, and how they're eventually going to run out. And so what I did to teach this lesson was to have a lump of blue tack stuck on one far wall. And over the course of the lesson, the kids had to take turns to go and retrieve a portion of that blue tack and keep it for themselves. And then eventually someone would go and get some blue tack, but there would be none left for them because the limited resource had run out.
Oh my goodness.
And this was my kind of kinesthetic activity for kids to feel and experience limited resources.
Oh, good old VAC learning.
Yeah, and just in case there were some non-kinesthetic learners in the room, to make sure everyone was getting involved and understanding and learning. The rest of the lesson was them making a comic strip to explain and summarize that learning.
Love that.
So that's one that I came up with, that I found in the back of my kind of mind that I've just recalled.
Deep, dark recesses of your memories.
Yes.
Okay.
I do want to just add and clarify that this idea of matching the activity to a particular pupil's learning style, whether that's kinesthetic, auditory, or visual, has completely been debunked as kind of the optimal way for a pupil to learn. But it was something that I believed at the time. And I guess the second thing that I wanted to reflect on with this particular activity that I had planned with the blue tack is actually the good thing about this lesson and this activity is that the idea of limited resources is something that can seem quite abstract if not explained particularly well. And the idea of having some blue tack and each pupil, having to take some and then eventually it running out and then realizing, there's no more left, and tying that to the word and the vocabulary limited or limited resource is actually really helpful because it helps the pupils to concretely understand an idea that might otherwise be very abstract if it was just an explanation with words only. And so I think that, in some ways, there is elements of this lesson that are helpful in helping and developing people understanding. But the issue that I have with it on reflection is the sheer amount of time invested in an activity that involved pupils constantly getting up and out of their seats probably meant that they weren't really thinking about what the meaning of the limited resource is and tying that to the experience. That same idea of using the blue tack as a concrete example to illustrate the point can be done much better with a clear explanation and still using that model, but not spending 5 minutes with the kids, each person in the room getting up, running around, grabbing a bit of blue tack, going back to their seats. And I think that distinction is quite important to make. So the principles of a good explanation are still important. The idea of concrete ideas is definitely an important part of what makes a good explanation and helps people's access learning and the ideas that might otherwise be abstract. But it's the way that they were implemented in that lesson which actually means they're unlikely to benefit sufficiently from that concrete experience. What about you? Have you had any memories come flooding back about your early years of teaching?
Yes, I have. But what I'm about to share isn't of a particular lesson, but it's more of, so this was a time when we were expecting an imminent Ofsted inspection.
Ooh,
and we had
Ofsted.
the big O. And we had an additional inset day arranged.
Wait, is that a thing you could do?
I think we did it. It was just like panic stations, go, go, go. And a message that one of the senior leaders delivered was that if an Ofsted inspector is walking along your corridor and is passing past your classroom or entering it, at that point, you need to ensure that they don't hear you as the teacher speaking, but instead they should just be hearing student voices instead. So I turned to whoever I like to refer to them as like froligs. You know those colleagues that become your friend, frolig?
Frolig.
So who was next to me, and I said, I did try and whisper it, but we've already established my foghorn voice, so it was still pretty audible. But I said, brilliant, can't wait until that happens, because I'll just leave my classroom and make a cup of tea. Obviously, I don't need to be there. Kids are teaching themselves. We'll get an Ofsted outstanding. Win-win.
You get a cup of tea, you also get the outstanding and the school benefits.
This is it. This is exactly it.
Oh, this is the problem with when like accountability and interpretation and the wrong idea, and it's just a mishmash and it's just the wrong thing. That actually reminds me, I remember, I'm trying to think where I heard this from, but there was a teacher who had lost their voice. So they delegated the teaching of the lesson to a pupil to kind of lead and facilitate. And the Ofsted inspector loved it, and they got outstanding, because I think individual teachers were graded back in the day.
This was really back in the day, wasn't it?
And so they got an outstanding grade, not having uttered a word in the lesson. Now, do you know what? I actually think if you have such a strong culture and you can actually not have to say a word and the productive lesson happens, that is kind of impressive, I'm not going to lie. But the idea that this was used to then celebrate the idea of eliminating teacher talk and maximizing the amount students are talking is just the wrong kind of seductive idea that we've talked about. So we talked about why silent debates, minimizing the amount of teacher talk, is so problematic in our last episode of Operation
Education. I thought you were never going to say that.
I know, I forgot to say at the start, so I thought weave it in.
Love that. So we've discussed what is wrong.
Yes. Now we need to think about, well, was there any bits of that was actually right? But really, what are the principles that we should be looking out for that guide our thinking now? Welcome back to another episode of Operation
Education.
I'm Pritesh Raichura.
I'm Neena Sharma.
The way that I would summarize what is problematic with silent debates, where the kids are reading each other's bits of sugar paper and adding comments on something they've never really learnt about before, or digging out water, H2O, laminated from trays of water to try and understand photosynthesis, is that...
Or just rewatching the same video film over and over again.
Of course.
Or colouring in posters.
All of these things, the thing they have in common is that it's the activities that are memorable and not the content. And this reminds me of a Dan Willingham quote, which is, memory is the residue of thought.
Okay, I love that. And that is a very popular quote. What does it mean?
So my understanding of it is that if we boil down what is learning... fundamentally, the brain attends to some new information, knowledge, ideas, and whatever it's thinking about, that's the thing that will stick in that brain for a longer time. Like if you're thinking about, where was that tray? How much did we splash each other in the lesson? Wasn't it fun that there was all these laminated bits of paper stuck around the room and I had to get one, and then me and my friend reached for the same one and we both competed to see who could get it but then there was so much blue tack and we were throwing the blue tack on each other as well, and that was really fun, then, well, that's what they're going to remember. And they're not going to remember carbon dioxide plus water produces glucose plus oxygen. Carbon dioxide is found in the atmosphere. Water is found in the soil. Like, they're not going to remember any of that because they weren't thinking about it, because memory is the residue of thought. That's my take on it.
Okay, so actually the problem with these types of activities is, even if the original intention is good and is sound from teachers because they want to try and support and enhance learning, the reality is these activities detract from it, because what's left, the memory that's left of is not the content of what they've learned, but how much fun, in inverted commas, that they've had from that activity. So they're not actually supporting and enhancing that learning. They're distracting from it because it's not focusing on the content. It's just that activity.
Yes. And so that's a really nice way of summarizing that. And that leads me on to the idea of, so then if we shouldn't be planning activities, then what should we be planning? And I think the answer is that the activity that the kids do has to be the content. In other words, the pupils in the class need to be hearing a really clear explanation, or they need to be answering questions about the thing that they need to learn, or they need to be reading information about the thing that they need to learn. And we need to make sure that they are following that and thinking about that only, and not being distracted by the details of the activities and the instructions and the random other things that are not the thing we want them to remember, the thing that we want them to learn.
So the explanation itself of the content needs to be the engaging thing, because that's what they're learning from. So what makes an engaging explanation?
Oh, so as always, I think this has become a bit of a mantra on Operation Education. I guess there's the content and then there's the delivery,
yes,
the two elements to it. But just taking a step back from that, in fact, focusing in on the content in a bit more detail, I think one of the most transformative ideas that I've come across in kind of reading, on my journey of reading about how to teach better, how to explain things better, how to make things land better, is rooted in cognitive science and the research on cognitive science. And I think the most powerful metaphor that I've come across that underpins everything that links to all the ideas that I think work best in the classroom is the idea that as experts in, for me it's science, for you it's English, whatever subject it is that we are teaching, we have a really clear web of knowledge in our heads that in cognitive science, I guess they call schema. So I just think about lots of individual dots which represent each of those dots or nodes of knowledge, and then you've got a link between them. So each idea, each fact that makes up a bigger explanation, it's not just a list of facts, it's an interconnected web of knowledge with those ideas all linking together in lots of different ways. And as experts, I have a web of knowledge, a schema in my head that's really granular. I can think about each precise chunk of information that makes up photosynthesis or limited resources, or in your case, Shakespeare and Macbeth, and the analysis of the plot, the analysis, the themes, whatever it is. I'm not the expert English teacher, even though I love to pretend to be.
You really do.
Alliteration, it all comes back to, really, isn't it?
When you talk about English, you literally only refer to alliteration and Macbeth.
That's my only two. But then when I talk about science, I just talk about
photosynthesis. So either way, it's just, those nodes, that schema, that web of knowledge.
Pretty small.
It's pretty small. It's pretty limited, Mr. Raichura, isn't it?
I got to step it up.
Someone's got to be building, extending that schema, is all I'm saying.
Well, I need some help there. So the web of knowledge, I think, is such an apt metaphor, because if we as the experts have that, the assumption is that the pupils in the class, that web of knowledge either doesn't exist if it's a topic that they've never encountered before. There are some, if they've never even heard of Macbeth before, they don't know very much about Macbeth. It's going to be it's almost like a blank slate they're starting from. Or there's like very bits of prior knowledge that they might have come across some of these ideas before, but we're going to add a lot of nodes of knowledge and a lot of links to this. And so then the challenge and the fun of teaching becomes, how can I chunk this up so that I'm teaching one node at a time and adding one link at a time? And that is what planning a really good explanation effectively comes down to. And across a unit of work, it's about, well, by the end of the unit, how much of this web of knowledge will I have built, and how well embedded will it be in the minds of the pupils?
So, as the teacher who's the expert holder of knowledge, so we've got very clear defined nodes and scheme, like these webs of knowledge essentially, and we have to be imparting something similar to the kids, but we've got to be aware of that expert kind of induced blindness, because they're starting from, as you said, either a blank slate or just perhaps disconnected bits of prior knowledge. So how do we replicate the schema in our minds for that particular topic into the kids' brains?
Yes. And so that has to mean that we have to think about, I don't just go into my lesson thinking, oh, I'll teach about photosynthesis and about that reaction. It's, what precise bits of knowledge will I teach in what order? And the most important thing there is that you chunk that and you make sure you explicitly give that knowledge to the class, rather than putting it all on posters and hoping for the best when they go around that they're going to absorb that information. So it's about how you're going to chunk it and how you're going to check they get it as you go along.
Okay, so we've got the planning of that content, clear, concise, and chunked. And then you said about checking, or...
Oh, I love all these C's coming through.
I mean, I don't want to say it again, but yeah.
Queen of alliteration.
I mean, you said... If I said it, it would be quite, But if you're saying about me, I'll accept it.
I'll give you that
compliment.
compliment.
I would never refer to myself in that way.
Of course you wouldn't. So we've got... Yeah, absolutely. You've got these chunks of knowledge that you're delivering one bit at a time. But this is the bit that I find really interesting, because there's a grain of truth in that old way of teaching that we alluded to at the start of this episode and last episode.
Okay.
Which is, we're saying kids might go around, absorb information from posters around the room, come back and teach each other. And I think in the kind of explicit teaching model, there are still elements of that we want to preserve. So we still... I might still explicitly teach a particular idea rather than relying on a poster and the kids interpreting or potentially misinterpreting that information. I'm going to make sure I deliver a clear explanation that all the kids are attending to. I'm making sure they're all paying attention with my beautiful cue, that call to attention, 3, 2, 1, star, whatever it might be. I'm checking to see are they all there. I then give that explanation really chunked way. But then I might genuinely give an opportunity for them to teach each other what I've just taught them. But crucially, they might practice in their pairs, having heard a really good explanation. So that pair work is still happening. They're still reinforcing that knowledge with each other.
Yes.
But they're not... The chances that they're doing that well and right are now much better because they've had a clear explanation from the expert teacher.
Yes.
And importantly... I'm chunking that, so once they do that short rehearsal and practice, it's rehearsal, it's not guessing, it's not interpreting, and I think this is what I picked up. I'm then listening back to what they've just shared, and then I'm giving them feedback if it's not quite right, and then they're practicing again. And so this is where we've gone from that minimal guidance to actually making sure every child in the room is making progress. Every child has the opportunity to feel successful. Every child has the opportunity to rehearse and practice and get feedback, then practice again. And then when they share those answers and they get it right, and I'm tying that to that warm, specific named praise, they are loving their lives, feeling super successful rather than a little bit lost, a bit confused. Maybe some of them feel successful, but some of them don't. It's just engineering success in the classroom to a much more refined, heightened, granular, precise way.
Brilliant. So they're not learning from a poster and then possibly perpetuating misinterpretations between themselves. From the outset, they're given that knowledge, that rich knowledge from the teacher, but you're saying, obviously, we don't then expect complete silence in the lessons. We want them to be discussing in their pairs. And I think you said kind of the rehearsals, like the verbal rehearsal, practicing these ideas, getting that confidence and fluency. But also, really important, you also don't just stop there. That process is you're collecting or gathering data, getting feedback, and fundamentally, you're just ensuring that they have really secured that knowledge and they've nailed it before, perhaps, is that before they then move on to, or you move on to the delivery of the next chunk of knowledge, and then you just repeat that process. And I guess that is what helps with connecting those nodes one at a time, that then eventually builds that web of knowledge and that schema.
Yeah, I mean, that was such a concise explanation. And what I would add there is just, I mean, I've used pair work as an example of reinforcing and rehearsing that knowledge, but it could equally be other types of questioning. It could be questions they answer on mini whiteboards that the teacher then scans and checks, or it could be other types of questioning. And I think that has to be something we return to in future episodes.
Yeah.
And we can look at each of those strategies in turn.
Should we go into the delivery a little bit? I think that is also something that we'll probably delve into later detail in a future episode. But if we've said, just in terms of the headlines of it, so you've planned the content meticulously beforehand, but then how are you delivering it? We know it's clear, concise, it's chunked. But if we are standing by this concept and we believe it, we have this deep belief and conviction that the teacher has that kind of expert, a word coming up, but like the expert authority, and they're imparting all that subject knowledge. Actually, well, what I've just thought of actually is this idea of engagements. We kind of mocked and ridiculed a little bit some of the previous activities and lessons that we've taught earlier on in a career.
Guilty as charged.
Right. But they came from good intentions in terms of wanting the kids to be engaged. It was just a bit misplaced in terms of what exactly engages the kids. So I think the assumption or the understanding at that time was so-called fun activities, which we've established kind of actually distracted from the learning rather than promoting it. But I think we have to keep with this idea of engaging the kids, and just to be very, very clear that that's something that we believe wholeheartedly in. We are educators and not entertainers, but we still need to make sure that the kids engage with that content. And I think that's where the delivery comes in. I think back in the day, we didn't need to focus on that as teachers because we were delivering quite little content. But now, if we're the expert authority imparting that subject knowledge, we're not talking relentlessly for an hour and having no kind of interaction from the kids. It's clear, concise, chunked, but we're still teaching the kids. So how do we make that delivery engaging? And I'm thinking lots of ways, but number one, it's that use of voice, isn't it? And that kind of variety to try and really hook the kids into what we're explaining to them.
Yes. And the idea of engagement is correct, as you said, but that's exactly what made those ideas so seductive. We thought engagement, of course you have to engage the class, but the way we were engaging them was the wrong way, because the thing that they left remembering was the activity and not the content. But if we deliver the content explicitly, but do that dryly, then we are not going to build schema successfully. Like, this is why we wouldn't lecture for an hour, as you said, to the class. So part of that is chunking it up, as you said, and part of it is delivery in voice. Can you tell me some ways that you use your voice or some things that you have in mind to help you channel a voice that is more engaging?
I think variety is the key, because we always criticize like a monotone. Like, why is that so problematic? because after a while, we just stop paying focus or attention to it. It's the variety and the range in how we use our voice that makes us sustain that attention. I sometimes think of it as like newsreaders sometimes, the way that they kind of go up and down in their intonation. But I think let's do a quick reminder or recap of the different elements of voice, because as I've said previously, I think voice is like this generic term for this tool that we have. And I think it's the most powerful tool, natural tool that we as teachers and educators have at our disposal. But if we're thinking about really varying it, then it is about that volume, that pace, that tone and the pitch. And I know we've talked about tone and pitch quite a lot when we were discussing that call to attention, but I'd love to speak for a moment about kind of volume and pace. So I know I say I'm a foghorn. We've talked about the importance of having a projected voice for a call to attention, but actually it's really powerful to sometimes during an explanation drop the volume of that voice. You still needs to be at a decent enough volume that the kids at the back of the classroom can access it. That's really also what we mean by being inclusive. But really the effect you want is that they almost are adjusting their body language and they're kind of leaning in.
I literally just did that.
Hear the next word that comes out of your mouth.
I literally just leaned in when you went quieter.
Because it makes it sound like what you're saying is, it's almost like you're sharing a secret and it's mysterious and it's really interesting to know. But also, almost instinctively, as I'm doing that, my pace is also affected. I'm kind of not necessarily speaking a lot slower, but I'm definitely incorporating dramatic pauses.
Yes.
Now, I'll go back to my normal voice now. I love the power of pause because I just think there are so many benefits to it. So I think kind of pedagogically, in a way, that pause just creates a break in an explanation that allows the kids to cognitively process what they've just learned. But also from a cultural perspective, the engagement and the excitement it creates, because it's that suspense and anticipation of what's coming next as well. And it's just really fun to play around with this. I think that phrase that you coined about try it out on your pets, not partners, it's part of it. We want it to become habitual, right? And I would say part of my planning for lessons would be not just ensuring my explanations are clear, concise, chunked, and we haven't gone in too much into economy of language, but that's also important. I would also plan in how I would use and adapt my voice at various points as well. So we talked about telling it like a secret, you could share it like a story, but yeah, just using your voice, varying it in order to engage.
And how might for an English teacher, you are literally telling lots of stories as part of your teaching, and maybe that might be true in a subject like history, say. But how is a maths teacher or a science teacher? How can we tell stories in our classroom better? Do you mean we literally have to come up with stories, or is it just we're delivering the explanation like a story? What are your tips for that?
Yeah, I don't think we necessarily need to make up lots of random, arbitrary anecdotes. So if there's a standard textbook equation that starts off with Daniel went into a shop, you can do things like exchange that name for like a name of a pupil in the class and just elucidate like a little bit. And that's also a little bit bringing the fun and frivolity, but it's engaging because the kids feel that it's relatable kind of to them. And it also becomes a bit of an in-joke in that lesson as well that you can then refer to throughout the lesson, but in subsequent lessons. And I think that's very bonding and connecting and is part of that kind of relationship building
winning
as
hearts.
Well. It definitely goes into, the winning hearts.
So I think there's actually two things you've said there that I think are really powerful. One is naming pupils in examples, which then naturally makes you use your voice more. It makes it more exciting because instead of it being, here's another example, we've got Josh goes into a shop, it's Neena goes into a shop, and you're just much more likely to engage the pupils as a result. But the second thing is is really consciously not only changing the name, but using your voice deliberately. And I think even if it wasn't an example with a name, I've seen lessons where even when you say, and then the next step in this equation, you divide both sides by 2. Yeah. Why do we divide both sides by 2? Let me have a think. It's because, and just even that thinking aloud, which maths teachers are so great at, by using your voice in a way that adds intrigue, a sense of mystery, can just transform an explanation and make it feel much more engaging.
Yes.
Because our brains, the human brain and our human ears are attuned to storytelling. And Dan Willingham, again, he uses that idea that stories are privileged in our minds and we're much more likely to remember them.
Yeah, stories connect us as human beings, and this is from the beginning of time, isn't it? And I love that you use the word deliberate, which I didn't, but that's exactly what it is. So it's almost like we all have a voice and we all teach using our voice, but it's very easy just to take it for granted. So I think maybe one of the biggest takeaways of today's episode is, and I know we have referred to it before and we will dive even deeper in later episodes too, but it's just to think, in a careful way, being intentional, deliberate about exactly how you use your voice and try it out. And I would say as well, actually, with any of these, if it's sort of a new strategy or a different approach to teaching, and it's hard, isn't it, when we're trying to do something that we're not accustomed to or we're unfamiliar with, and we do need to build the confidence. I know we've joked about practicing on your pets, not partners, and there is definitely an element of that practice helps to build that confidence and for these things to become habitual. But you do also want to be trying it out in a lesson, and sometimes it can be a bit intimidating trying some or experimenting with something brand new with that really challenging year 10 group. So just find one of your classes that perhaps you have a stronger rapport with and that are open to experiencing, new things. Maybe if you've got like a top set year 7, that's just, one example. So try out changing your or varying your voice in a deliberate way with that class that you've selected.
That's a great concrete tip for teachers to go away and try it with a class that they think it will land well with. And I think that what's fascinating about some of these strategies, like use of voice in the classroom with these examples, is that they tie back to something we've been talking a lot about on Operation Education, which is increasing a sense of joy and warmth in the classroom. And it's almost like when you go from, I'm just teaching this equation, seeing where this goes over here, and then this, or photosynthesis, blah, 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 to being like, and this is what's intriguing about my subject. And isn't this amazing? And, did you know? Just this idea of I'm telling it like a secret, or I'm telling it like a story, or there's a sense of intrigue here, just makes the class feel convinced that you love the subject. And if that comes across, it just is more likely to bring out the best in the kids, and their relationship with both you and the subject is not going to suddenly revolutionize overnight, but it's all these little signals they get from their teacher that, this Sarah really seems to like this topic. They're more likely to enjoy it. Or Miss is really making this sound like it's super important. It must be important. I believe and buy into that. Yeah,
that's so true. And demonstrating love of your subject, like it becomes infectious, that love. And exactly as you said, it generates the joy in the room as well. And it's just very, very inspiring. And there will be times where kids will, might mock you, like, all right, calm down, miss, don't get overexcited about like whatever this is. But we know they say that, but they're blooming loving their lives because, if you've got a choice of the two classrooms where it seems like the teacher's just going through the motions and mechanics versus someone who is, genuinely excited about what they're teaching, I think that has a transformative impact on the learning environment.
Is there a danger that this advice that we're sharing is misinterpreted as, hold on, this sounds like what you're saying is you're going back to entertaining your classes rather than educating them? What would you say to that criticism potentially?
I would disagree with that, and I'd say, no, it's not going back to that. And the reason is you're still standing by the fundamental principles of you are starting off with planning your lesson with how you are with the content of your excellent explanations. So the clarity and concision and chunking of them and the economy of language. And you're making sure that when you're delivering it in that engaging way by varying your voice, for example, that you're kind of, it just grounds you, I think, and keeps you rooted and makes you disciplined because you have that clarity yourself in exactly what your explanation needs to consist of and how you are building that schema, those words of knowledge in your kids' minds. And if you've combined that with also having the foundation of a strong culture in that classroom, then actually there's not too much danger of getting waylaid there, I think.
100% agree with you. It's like you are going to be winning their minds by building that schema really clearly. But if you use your voice in a more engaging way, you're more likely to hold their attention, which increases the likelihood of them learning more. You're also winning hearts more at the same time because they are falling more in love with your subject, or they're more inspired and enthused by the subject. And even if they don't leave thinking this is the most interesting thing in the world, at least they think and they know that you think it's interesting. Yeah. And that is important because that automatically is just more engaging. It's like you think about CPD you have to sit through. Would you rather two identical content delivered, one, the person just sounds like what they're saying is beautiful, fun, engaging, interesting, important, or versus identical content but the person just sounds like they're just telling you, here's what great teaching is, this is another strategy, da-da-da-da-da. Like, I know which CPD I'd rather be sat in, even though the content is identical. And I think that's a good analogy, perhaps, in this case.
For sure. And I'm also just thinking, if kids are, if you truly engage them, then they'll just forget to be, distracted, and they won't want to, disrupt either. So I think, engaging the kids in the right way.
Yes. Okay, final thing that I want to touch upon with regards to explicit instruction is if we're saying we're explicitly planning explanations out and telling kids the knowledge or breaking that skill down, getting them to practice each chunk individually, building that up, a misconception might be, hold on, so you're telling the kids absolutely everything. They're not thinking hard at all. What might you say to that?
Just them actually learning and practicing some of those key ideas and then recalling them accurately is actually takes up a lot of their thinking time and their cognitive space. So actually, I just think that's a prerequisite for what comes afterwards. They're not going to be in a position to really manipulate that knowledge in a very flexible way until they've been explicitly taught it and that they have rehearsed and practiced it sufficiently. And when they've got to that stage and level of confidence, then the next step and stage is for them to kind of, where they're just thinking on then on a different level. But do not underestimate the power of thinking that goes into just genuinely learning brand new knowledge for the first time in a way that they are actually going to retain it for the future. And as I say to the kids, like, if you can't remember, I say this at the start of recaps, if you can't remember it, then you haven't actually learned it.
Absolutely. And I think that it's easy for us. You alluded to expertise or expert-induced blindness earlier, and I think that's so true of the subjects that we teach. We might think, just the reactants of photosynthesis and where they come from, that's the basic stuff. I want them thinking about what factors affect the rate of reaction of photosynthesis and why. So we'll go over that stuff really quickly, the basic stuff, because they're not thinking. They'll think hard in the later parts, but you've just explained that's kind of flawed thinking in some ways, because even getting to grips with what are the basic building blocks of knowledge, the basic nodes of knowledge, if that's brand new information to you, it is thinking hard. I mean, I think back to when I've had to, if I've been learning, when I go to a new country and I'm trying to learn the basic phrases, my goodness me, by the time I've learnt the third word, I've learnt hello, good morning, good afternoon. You asked me what good morning is, and I've already forgotten.
Yeah.
And does that mean that I'm just not thinking hard? Absolutely not. I think I am thinking hard. It's just this is new to me, so I'm going to need so much practice. And then I might then be able to do something interesting with like thinking about how I might use that within a sentence. But that feels miles away if I haven't got the words in the first place and the vocabulary in the first place.
Exactly.
So to kind of summarize, activities end up being more memorable than the content. And that can happen when we're seduced by those ways of learning that are active learning, and the kids are moving around to learn and all that kind of stuff. So we got to be thinking, what is the content the kids need to master, and how can I deliver a really clear explanation or model that's going to support them to master that content? Yeah. And that will require not only a good explanation, but opportunities to rehearse and practice and answer questions. We then talked a bit about how we deliver that well-planned content using our voice in a really engaging way, telling it like a story, or really thinking about telling it like a secret, involving the kids' names in those explanations are 3 concrete ways that the pupils can really feel more engaged in that explanation. And lastly, we addressed the idea that, well, recall is just really basic. No. It is thinking hard. And that's a precursor to them doing more meatier stuff with that in terms of making links or manipulating that knowledge. We've covered a lot in that episode.
I'm exhausted.
That is a complex...
My brain hurts.
That's a complex web of schema that we have weaved. So it's definitely something we'll be returning to in a future episode.
So, Pritesh, what's our question or scenario for next week?
So there is a school which currently has a system where individual pupils earn points. So some schools call them praise points, others call them merits, others call them achievement points. And pupils can earn these individually. And in this particular school, there is currently no system for what happens to individual pupils once they accumulate a certain number of points. And the current proposal is that maybe pupils can trade or swap a certain number of points for certain items. For example, 10 points and they can swap it for a pen, or 20 points and they can swap it for a chocolate bar, or if they get 100 points, there might be vouchers for a high street retailer. So the scenario is this a good option, or is an other alternative better if the goal is we want to motivate the kids as much as possible? Next time on Operation
Education.
If you would like to share your answers to the scenario/question, or even want to suggest a topic for a future episode of Operation Education, then get in touch. Email me on pritesh@bunsenblue.com. If your school would like high quality CPD, then get in touch with me via bunsenblue.com/CPD. Operation Education is a Bunsen Blue production.